you're live.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, April 18th, 2023. It is 10:25 a.m. and we are taking up work on the RES bill, the Renewable Energy Standard, which is currently a committee bill, and the current draft is 23-0107. With that, I'd like to jump right in. I appreciate people coming, and we have kind of an up-tempo schedule, but I think, well, everyone here is good at sharing testimony, so I think we'll be fine. And as we get started, we've talked about a number of things as we've discussed the RES bill so far, and so I think in terms of help trying to provide a clarification on expectations, I'd just like to share the thought that the reason we're looking into this is that the RES has aged over time. A major thrust in the state of Vermont is beneficial electrification. That electrification is more genuinely beneficial as the power supply gets cleaned up. So that I think there's a shared interest in going to 100% renewable energy sooner rather than later. Current law has us going to 75% renewable by 2032. So the overarching question is, how can we pick up the pace on that? There is also a concern about how to make that transition in as cost effective and affordable a way as possible, as well as an environmentally sound way of doing it. So they are big questions, and as they would play out over the years, they'll affect hundreds of thousands of ratepayers and tens of millions of dollars. We want to be careful about the choices we make. So I would say that what the pathway I see for this bill is to, and that's why I've asked folks here to be able to address today, is the notion that we would make a commitment to something like 100% by 2032 without specifying the balance of different sources of power at this point, because there are plenty of pending questions about for instance, in-state versus out-of-state generation, different types of generation, associated values like battery storage. So the notion will be to get a study done that will help put us in a better position to answer questions about reshaping the RES next session. But meanwhile, to make a step forward and say, this is our policy and goal. What we want is more information to figure out how to do it well. So it's a little bit of a long preamble, but I wanted to put that down so we have a context in which to hear today's testimony. With that, I can jump to Ms. Schilling. Thank you for coming over and joining us this morning. And you have Mr. Marin with you. Yes. I didn't quite recognize you for sure under. Good to see you both again. Thanks for coming. Thanks.
Good morning. It's good to be here. So for the record, Elizabeth Schilling, I'm a staff attorney and hearing officer with the Vermont Public Utility Commission.
And I'm Jake Marin. I'm also a staff attorney at the Public Utility Commission.
So we'll just kind of go section by section through the bill and go over the Commission's position, if we have any concerns or thoughts about the bill. And we might ask you some questions, and feel free to interrupt us and ask questions as well. So the first section regarding the changes to the renewable energy standard percentage requirements, the Commission does not have a position on changes to the percentage requirements. The Commission will implement.
Can we pause? There's a little
sure.
relation about draft. So we're looking at, I believe.
This is not a new draft from last week? It is not. Okay.
Draft, and we got 3.1, 84.4.3. Is that what you're responding to? I just want to sync everyone up. Again, it's draft 3.1. The date and time stamp 4/4.
Oh, it's funny. I actually have a 5.
I have 5. Oh, I'm sorry.
So you're working off of this one, the one I gave you this morning,
4/6,
which is what Candace gave me this morning. So,
Yes, but that's a revision too. Sorry about this.
so I don't know which one then should be.
Okay.
So.
So I'm gonna
this
do it on the website.
will-
No, because it's here, it's not from,
This
this is a.
Yeah, that's
would it be
not,
possible for us
this
to
you might, this is
Should
from,
we draft 5.1?
This is from Candace, it's even though
Right.
it says.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
We
we
have
have
the
that.
right one. Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to.
Right.
Where,
Yeah,
draft
that's- okay.
5.1,
That's the one. I-
dated 4/6.
Yeah. I am.
I'm glad we checked on that.
all right, so thank you everyone for making sure we're literally in the same document. The only difficulty here is that are you a party to the revisions in this document? I want to make sure we're all looking at the same document. There is a distribution utility proposed that it's a yellow document. And in terms of us having the same,
Oh, I have not, I don't believe you've
Yeah.
seen,
Revisions to statute or revisions to the bill that were.
It's from the group of people, right?
yes, but it's not from the PUC.
Right.
right?
That's
So
what I'm
they have a
trying to be-
different bill that they're looking at.
Sounds like
Do
it.
you have copies of the bill or?
This was on the website. This was the latest
Yeah.
copy that was on the
And
website.
I
So,
will look at the website.
So,
Well, I didn't post that one because I had this one, so. let me-
Yeah.
But it
so
would be available from last week. It would be on,
Yeah.
okay, then I'll just look at what we had on what Thursday.
same here. Right, so such is, let's continue.
All right,
And we'll, so for people who are following in the room or outside, we're using draft 5.1 dated 4/6/23 and timestamp 6:08 p.m.
that's that.
Thank you very much.
All right, if folks are ready, I'll start again. Okay.
Good.
So with the first section, the changes to the renewable energy standards percentage requirements, the commission does not have a position on those changes. We'll implement the percentages as adopted by the legislature. The next section regarding procurement, the commission is interested in better understanding the committee's intent with that provision. Yes, so subdivision E regarding procurement. The language is drafted right now is very broad and high level. And it also makes reference to subdivision 8010C1, and that's specific to the net metering program. And so this language is talking about aligning existing procurement programs, which we're not quite sure what that means, and then establishing new procurement programs. And the existing procurement programs, net metering, standard offer, those have fairly expensive statutory frameworks associated with them. And so this language just saying that we could establish new procurement programs is without some more framework or direction about what those procurement programs would be. It's unclear what's intended here, what we would establish.
So more clarity would be helpful.
Yes.
Thank you.
What are we intending to do with this?
Yeah, so I mean, it is a broad and open statement, and it was a starting language to stimulate a conversation about other means of bringing more power online. So for instance, would there be a standard offer 2.0 or some other strategy along those lines?
I think just sort of two thoughts about that. When you talk about existing programs, it'd be helpful to explicitly
Yeah.
state which programs you're referring to, whether it's just a standard offer or any other program that we might have. It's worth pointing out that the standard offer program exists in statute and has already largely run its course. And so to the extent this is intended for the commission to do something other than what's already authorized in statute, there should be explicit direction to the commission to do that. And then also there's sort of two layers of this. Is under what circuit this as written gives the commission discretion to choose whether to align existing programs or create new programs. I think it would be helpful to give the commission guardrails on when to exercise that discretion. So what circumstances would give the commission good cause to either change a program that exists or create a new one? And then the second consideration is what are the criteria for those new programs that the commission creates. And this took a stab at it and references section 8010C1, which are the criteria for our net metering program. Some of the criteria in that statute might be germane to creating a new procurement program, but other criteria in that statute are very peculiar to net metering and wouldn't map to a new program. So I'm just going to give one example from 8010-1 C. It says, to the extent feasible, ensuring that net metering does not shift costs included in each retail electricity provider's revenue requirement between net metering customers and other customers. If I replace the words net metering with new procurement program, that sentence doesn't really make sense because procurement programs don't shift costs, they just create, new costs. So and there are customers who participate and non-participating customers. So it just wouldn't translate well to this context. Other provisions in that section include E, which talks about allowing customers to participate in net metering, helping customers with directly participate in the procurement program. This would be for utilities to purchase power, at least that's how we read it. And then H talks about customers retaining ownership of environmental attributes. That's, again, very specific to net metering, might not map well to a procurement program. So, again, just to recap, more guidance about when the commission would be exercising this discretion, and if so, what criteria should we apply to any new programs or alterations to existing programs.
So it's not, I don't know if you routinely consider things in your own shop, because standard offer has largely sunsetted, if there have been sort of informal discussions going on about follow-on procurement strategies, like a revised standard offer or something comparable to standard offer.
My recollection is that we were directed by the legislature to write a report on the standard offer program recently, and in that report, the commission did not make a recommendation to renew or extend the standard offer program. That it shouldn't be interpreted as the commission is opposed to this or anything, but it was not the commission's recommendation to create a follow-on program. But again, all of this exists in the context of what the res says.
Right.
And so if the res is changing, it's hard for us to have a position right now about whether additional programs are necessary or changes to existing programs are necessary.
Thank you.
Would you mind sending that report to us?
Okay.
I'm trying to find it on the website and it's not readily available to me. Yeah, Jen. Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a good point. If the res is changing, then a program ought to change any new program or the evolution of an existing program ought to be complementary.
All right, to move on to the next section regarding the changes to the definition of net metering system. So again, this is language that it would be helpful to better understand the committee's intent with these changes. As drafted, there could be some difficulties implementing these changes for the commission. So you could speak to the first issue you identified with the projects.
Yeah, so just as background, every net metering system that's built has customers that use that net metering system, either customers who are, sort of directly connected to that system and whose native load is being offset by the production from that system, or maybe group members who are located somewhere else in the service territory and receiving credits on their bill.
Mm-hmm.
So as the net metering program is constructed right now, every customer's usage roughly equals the output of that system, because any credits that are generated in the year that are not used, they revert to the utility. So in that context, we were struggling to understand how matching a customer's usage with the size of the system would work. And specifically, usage is measured in kilowatt hours, usually speaking. I mean, we could talk about customers' peak demand, but that's not necessarily indicative of their overall energy consumption over a year. And so when the sentence that says the customer's usage will exceed 150 kilowatt hours, that would be difficult for the commission to implement. Also, the word customer, as used in here, is a little confusing. You use the singular version of that word. So one way of interpreting this would mean that a system is limited to a single customer, not a group. So if the committee's intent was to limit these larger systems to single customer systems, individual net metering systems, and not group systems, it would probably be better to explicitly state that. Similarly, we don't always know the identity of the customer when a CPG application is filed. The application may be filed by a developer who intends on recruiting a customer at a future date. And so this, it would be unclear when the commission would be checking on this. If it's not when the CPG is granted, is it when operation starts, and then what happens if they don't meet this requirement? Are we supposed to revoke the CPG or do something else? It just raises questions as to how the commission would actually make this work. And so I think that those are the two big issues is how would we tell whether the customer is using a sufficient amount, and then what was the committee's intent about the number of customers using these systems? Because again, right now, any system that's built, the customers are generally receiving credits that are no more than what they use in a year. And I don't think we had.
We didn't really have any other comments. The commission doesn't have a position on the last section regarding the report. I think in general, just gathering more information before making changes to the res might be beneficial, but we don't have any position on the requirements of this specific report.
Well, thank you. In terms of intent in sort of lay language was to reduce the size of net metering systems back down to 150 kW in general in terms of capacity, but that if there were an off-taker who had the ability to use the generation of a system at 500 kW, that would still be allowed. What I'd often say was, Ethan, as I originally spoke to our drafter, not so it's a single customer, not a group, and that it would also be co-located at the so there's a physicality to it that
All right,
co-located at the
that's similar.
load.
There's a provision in our net metering rule regarding preferred sites, subdivision 9 of that definition that talks about co-location for.
So I'll follow up with you and council and come up with some language for the committee to look at that is more clearly expressing what the original intent was. Like,
Thank you, Chair Bray. Thank you for taking the time to review this. And it's nice to see you in person. I feel like I've seen emails. I appreciate your description of how implementation would be difficult with some of these changes, although I want to understand that a little bit more because I think that the risks that we're running right now with the lack of renewable energy growing at the pace we need to is a far greater risk to our collective humanity than possibly the administrative costs that would be associated with proper implementation. So I do want to understand if you need capacity to meet the demands of these changes and what that would look like more broadly. But the big question I have, and I don't know if you've reviewed it, but I would love to see in this bill the addition of some battery storage related language. And I'm wondering if you had taken a look at the bill that has come our way, or if we could ask, as we consider potential changes to this, if we could ask them to look at that section as well.
sure. I mean, there's a study proposed, and that study language is also a work in progress. Like, what does it include? There's another bill, S-140, that addresses battery storage.
Yeah.
And those conversations have overlapped quite a bit with discussions REV, for instance, might we improve the value of intermittent generation by looking at projects that can layer on associated storage under the control of the distribution utility or something like that. And I think so. We need to thanks, Senator. I mean, I think we'd like to tune that language up so that it asks better questions, so that it will be a more useful report to everyone when we reconvene next year. The other, this is not, the other thing that's happened in committee discussion is there's been a question as to the best party to lead that study. And I know that there are folks who will hear from the utilities have come back to us and recommended that the PC be the entity to lead on the study that's requested. So obviously we would talk to you a lot more about that before asking you to consider such a thing. As drafted, it's actually a contract let out of the Joint Fiscal Office, more like what we did there. Resources for the future study and past. Okay, so thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to invite Mr. Port to join us.
Senator McCormick, if you want passing those down.
Good morning.
Senator McDonald, if you want passing that.
I'm gonna put it up there also, so you can, pick your poison, whether you, I like to have it up there because I know people are watching. And, it's good for them to see as well. So I have not reviewed that revised language. I found out about a few minutes ago. But I'm actually I think that's okay. So I'm gonna zoom out a little bit here. And just talk at a high level at first and remind folks what's going on right now as it relates to the renewable energy standard and some of the implications of at least the older draft of the bill.
And if you could just, maybe you're going to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. TJ Kaur, Director of Planning at the Public Service Department.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start where I often do with the energy plan and the climate action plan. And so both of these plans were consistent in how they address the electric sector. The energy plan called for consideration of adjustments to the renewable energy standard, what we're talking about, right? And complementary programs comprehensively and through an open process. So not just taking in isolation kind of one piece, but looking at a whole package of changes and how we can improve on what we have now to identify the areas for improvement. The climate action plan, I want to put this on here too, that said it should develop a 100% carbon-free or renewable electric portfolio standard. I'm going to make sure that was on here. You had some testimony last week that said the action plan said 100% renewable called for. It called for one or the other, and to examine that and to it being mindful of the economic impact of that choice as we go forward. Because as you said, Senator Bray, in the introduction, we're electrifying and that is our strategy. So we need to keep electric costs as affordable as possible. So in implementing the comprehensive energy plan, we have initiated our public engagement process. So we started that last summer with a request for input and looking to help build our public engagement plan, which we released last fall and have started implementing. And that plan was broken out into 3 phases. The first phase was educational opportunities. So we held a series of webinars where we really started at the 101 level of, even explaining what is a megawatt hour and what is a megawatt We actually had for webinars that we've done, 200 participants in one, and hundreds in others, and so it was pretty well attended by a pretty wide range of folks. We had feedback and even had Sustainable Energy Advantage come in to do a special session on renewable energy credits and marketplace for that. Those are all available on our website. I encourage you all to look at them. But that was kind of the first page, right? First phase, capacity building, start to drum up some awareness of, hey, we have an electric sector that we're really relying on in order to meet our energy policy and climate goals. And so, we need to level up our understanding in order to really have a real conversation about the issues. Phase 2, we're planning for, we're about to sign a contract. It was in the works for polling, widespread polling to actually get a representative sample of Vermonters to understand their thoughts for what's important to them as it relates to electricity. Along with that contract, it's broad polling, and then it drills down to have a handful of focus groups, 8 to 12 focus groups that will provide some information. Vermont Law School would be a subcontractor to the contractor to help with a policy brief, to share, to poll those folks, have a focus group, and then poll again afterwards to really see, get informed polling. We also are in phase 2 working with the Climate Action Office to engage specific community organizations and really community outreach to leveraging the work of the Just Transitions Committee and the engagement efforts of the Climate Action Office, so that we're reaching out to communities that aren't normally engaged in this type of process. And then as part of the phase 2 is also that this engagement is informed by technical analysis. So I'll get into a little more, but we're planning on already doing technical analysis on the renewable energy standard. And it's really important that public engagement, when we're talking with community-based organizations, when we're doing polling, that when we have workshops at the end of the summer that are interactive with like a wide range of stakeholders, that the technical analysis is connected to that engagement process. We don't want to kind of do engagement and then say, oh yeah, we did technical analysis over here and it says something else that we're not telling you about. It's got to be, in our mind anyway, it's got to be, it should be linked in order to kind of have that honest conversation, transparent conversation with stakeholders as we go forward. And then phase 3 is really developing as the process goes, developing those recommendations and saying, hey, what do you think? Did we get it right? And lots of people will say no, lots of people say yes, and getting that feedback and making changes as is appropriate.
Can I just ask a question? Thank you, Chair Bright. So what part of this will cover the renewable energy standard? Are you going to have that as like a workshop within this?
This is it's all focused on the renewable energy standard. It's all focused on electric procurement. So it's really tier 1 and 2 mostly of the renewable energy standard. Tier 3 is obviously related, and we've touched on it, but it has not been the focus. It's really on our procurement policies, which I think are encompassed in tier 1.
So if I understand correctly, this would not be, because it seems broader than just the renewable energy standard, is what I feel like I heard. So I just want to understand, are you doing something specific on the renewable energy standard within this? Or it's just kind of broadly, this would be impacting the renewable energy?
So thank you for that clarification. I really wasn't clear. We think about the renewable energy standard as the overarching policy for our electric sector, where programs like the standard offer and net metering fall under that. And so we're thinking that this engagement encompasses all 3 of those things.
Okay, so you have like a standard offer workshop and
if that's a desired focus of the working groups, that we might not necessarily say this is a standard offer workshop. We might say what were the goals of the standard offer and what were the benefits of the standard offer and how should that be encompassed in a new renewable energy standard? What would
Okay.
be the best way to accomplish those goals?
And
And maybe it is extending the standard offer. We want the opportunity for developers to, not have to have a PPA with a utility and be able to have this other option to develop. That could be a benefit that we want to continue or extend in the standard offer. And we may say, hey, standard offer could be improved. It wasn't location specific, and we could encourage those projects to be located in areas that are better for the grid also, and kind of
sure.
improve in both ways. So it's encompassed.
Okay, yeah, the reason I'm asking is because as we compare the bill to what I assume your presentation will be, is we don't need to do the bill, just reading ahead possibly. But we've got a process that's happening that will accomplish the goals that we have in the bill. It's kind of what I think I'm picking up on. I'd love to know a little bit more about the actual makeup of the workshops, to understand if it's going to articulate the questions that I'd like to have answered that would be in the bill as it stands. So when you say spring, are you now doing workshops?
We're not now. So spring, summer. So we're just getting the polling. We expect the polling to be in the end of May, beginning of June, depending on how quick the state moves with the contracting process, which is out of my control. But it's so that's for the polling and focus groups over the summer, and then starting to engage with community organizations and building those relationships. May, if we're lucky, but really it's more realistically probably June. And then we're still shaping those kind of workshops. So we don't have kind of this workshop will accomplish X, Y, and Z in the fall yet.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood
right.
then. I thought the workshops were happening now.
No, not yet.
Okay, thank
Not
you.
yet.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So one more thing that currently happens that I just want to make you aware of, that statute already does require us to do an analysis of the renewable energy standard. We have it's titled in statute as the consolidated res model, and that estimates the costs and benefits of the renewable energy standard. So it looks at what the impacts to ratepayers are and what the carbon reductions associated with the renewable energy standard are. This is a comparison of, kind of pre-renewable energy standard to what we have now. So that's kind of the basis of the comparison usually. But we have, the key inputs of like load forecast, energy and fossil prices, technology prices, net metering adoption rates. And in that process, we we outreach to specific stakeholders. Now, in the past, we've kind of focused on outreach to, I'll just say the usual suspects, because that's what we knew how to do. We're looking to broaden that now. So in the past, it was Renewable Energy Vermont and BNRC and BPERG and the utilities, EAN, and we're looking to broaden that and connect it to this public engagement process that I was talking about.
The report that you're citing there, so is that, you have an annual report, right? On
Correct.
RES. And is that what this is referring to, or is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what it's referring to. Last year, we submitted it as an attachment to the energy plan, because it all came at once, that was 2022. Time's fine. 2023, this year, we have our own renewable energy standard report and the model costs. And
sorry, just to make sure I'm following, is that a recollection of the annual report? Is it's a January report? So is this report you just passed by, is that woven into the annual report, so you've already seen it, or?
Yes, you have already seen it. Yes, it comes with the annual energy report.
Thank you.
So we have in this year, in connecting with the public engagement process. We're working on a technical analysis scope of work that is broader than we've done in the past. And this gets to your question a little bit, Senator White, of, you assume we're saying we don't need this bill. Not necessarily, or maybe not the version of the bill, in terms of what we think should be analyzed. And it's a much broader set of items than is in your bill. I'm not going to read this whole slide, but it incorporates portions of what is in the bill, analyzing tier 2 and scenarios of 20% by 2030, 30% by, I think 2035 is on the slide, a 100% or 100% renewable requirement, cleaner renewable, looking at an additional tier of just regional new projects, or a regional new requirement to purchase new regional renewable energy credits. And then looking at the economic impacts, positive and negative, the equity and environmental impacts, which would include emissions, to Vermont, to consumers, to society, of a number of other potential changes. You mentioned storage as one thing that could be incorporated. I think that I think of storage as one component of load management, and so, but load management to include storage as an option, something that we should really be looking at. The grid impacts, how we look at new facility, like what we define as an actual new facility. And then I have on the slide also procurement tools, and that's what I mean by we should look at standard offer, net metering, or some other tool. I think this is a broad list. I think that one of the points here is that it really should be a comprehensive look at how to best move forward. If we kind of do some one-offs on different pieces of this, like I think there's room to improve net metering, for example. But if we just kind of look at one-offs, I'm afraid that there's going to be the inclination to say, well, we fixed, a portion of this, and now we can just leave the rest next year. We don't need to do any more. And really, if we have a comprehensive look at the renewable energy standard or electric procurement, we hopefully will get a better result. And what I would propose is that the study the study in the bill, I propose that it could come to the Public Service Department, but then have it be, direct a working group in the study that says, and I think this is the last line on the slide, like modeled over how the Client Council is overseeing the technical analyses that are going on there, where there's a task group appointed to actually have input on the scope of the study, have input on the assumptions that are going in, look at the business as usual, look at the assumptions that are going in, and then see the results and comment on the results. I think the department is best positioned to manage that kind of study, in that we have the technical capability and that we going to do this stuff every day. And I get it. Just to be honest, we're the administration, right? And I get it. So have this advisory group to kind of input on the assumptions. And I'll say that we're the administration, but also point out that we conducted the analysis for the energy plan, and we conducted, which went into the pathways report, which went into the marginal abatement cost curve and we've been managing those projects. We managed the thermal efficiency task group, back a decade ago, building energy labeling groups, codes updates, these technical analyses. I don't think in any of those reports, it's been a question of, was the analysis, did somebody put the thumb on the scale for the analysis? It was, once the analysis was done, then there was different recommendations. And I think that's completely fair to argue over the recommendations of, well, I read that a different way. There's a range of potential outcomes. one entity puts emphasis here, one there. But the technical analysis, I think the department has shown over and over again that has been really sound. And so I'll just throw that out there. I was, the total energy study is another one that Dr. Hopkins, who had testified last week, was there. I was the project manager for that study, working for ASA. And so I really think that there's, we're kind of steeped in all of this and really can lead a really good objective study here.
Is that the 2013 report?
Which the total energy study? I think that was in 2014. It was kind of a precursor to the 2016 energy plan. So 2014 timeframe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to shift gears for one more minute here and kind of just talk about the tier 1 piece of the bill. So this chart here, sorry, my Zoom thing is blocking the chart. This chart here is our, after the disposition of renewable energy credits, what our portfolio mix is now. And that is based on total sales, not retail sales. Our renewable energy standard is based on retail sales, like your kilowatt hours at your home and at a business. This also includes losses, and shows we're 90% non-emitting right now. We have the ISO New England mix at 10%, and everything else does not have carbon emissions. And not talking about life cycle, I'm just talking about how it's reported in the greenhouse gas inventory. And so what would a 100% renewable tier do? It would really change this chart so that the ISO New England mix would look like about 7% on here. And that's because the difference is mostly losses, right? Because the 100% renewable standard would be based on retail sales, and we'd still have losses in here. And so when you think about whether you want to do this or not, I suggest thinking, well, what are we getting if we're doing it for carbon emissions? The difference here is 3% in this portfolio chart. And the way we'll get there is that utilities will purchase more renewable energy credits, right? And they'll purchase those from the tier 1 eligible resources that are least cost. So more existing resources in New England, or Hydro-Quebec resources, or any New York resources that could be imported, right? So, and then, currently or recently, those renewable energy credits have cost $10 a megawatt hour. In the last year, they've been anywhere from $5 to $10, but recently around the $10 range. And so I just did some quick math here, assuming there's no load growth. We have 5.3 million megawatt hours of retail sales. 25% of those are now required to be renewable. The utilities need to purchase 1.3 million RECs. And so at $10 a REC, that's $13 million in 2032. That would be, a potential cost. Now, it could be less than that if the RECs are $5. It's $6 million, $6.5 million. RECs could be more than that too. Just simply taking the current renewable energy standard and switching it to 100%, it comes at a cost. And then just again, what are we getting from that? We're getting more REC purchases, and on the accounting in the greenhouse gas inventory, we get 3% more clean here. And then is that worth it? Is the question. And are you driving more renewable energy development that way? Are you looking in state? Are you, is that trade-off worth it, is the question. question. And I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, that that was a choice we're making. And if you just want the carbon emissions, you could go to 100% clean, and you could still get that result at a lower cost. But then you're looking at more nuclear. That's another trade-off. So just to be clear on what those trade-offs are. What I suggest is following what the Climate Action Plan and the Comprehensive Energy Plan said, is consideration of those trade-offs in the transparent process that is the public engagement process. So do the study. I suggest that it's the department that is assigned it with a climate council type work group to ensure that we would have kind of that stakeholder engagement and input into the assumptions. To be honest, we're planning on doing that anyway, but I can understand why you would want to do that, and have a comprehensive change to the renewable energy standard next year. Have all of this inform that leading to next year.
Thank you, Chair Bright. So I appreciate what you just said about the climate and the CEP basically having a recommendation to do the stakeholder process. That's not kind of what I originally remembered from the CEP. My understanding, and I went through because as you were talking, I was starting to find some things that were reminding me of what the findings were. And they're recommending a carbon-free power supply requirement. So I'm just wondering how that squares kind of with what you're suggesting.
So yeah, on page 270, it has kind of the
Sorry.
actual-
Yes, okay.
Yeah, of the energy plan. It has the consideration of both. And this is a quote on this language that I have up here.
Okay. You're looking
so-
at a slightly different set. I guess where I was looking at was ES8, which says there is no binding requirement beyond the tier 1 renewable energy standard that utilities must procure 75% of their retail electric sales from any source of renewable energy by 2032. So that's kind of what we're talking about now.
Right, yeah.
And that says Vermont should develop a carbon-free power supply requirement.
Right, so that could be just carbon free, or it could be renewable.
Okay.
Right? So when you look in the details of the recommendation in the later chapter, you'll see the more specifics that I'm talking about. At least that's how I read about it. So
Okay.
carbon free standard could be 100% renewable,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So we need to kind of determine what the best path there is with input through the process and technical analysis.
Okay,
So-
but broadly, it feels like that is the direction that we're meant to move
To a
based on the
carbon free,
recommendation. Yeah.
right? Yeah, no, I'm not saying that we
Okay.
shouldn't move there.
Just wanted-
I'm
Because the
saying that we
trade-off
should.
question was kind of like,
Well, yeah, should it be? No, fair enough. But so right now we're already 90% carbon free, right? And what I was saying in the trade-offs question is this proposal would make us 93% carbon free. And, we should look at this comprehensively and to look at what's the best way to get to 100% carbon free.
yes.
And
okay.
so one of the things, I didn't read all the things on the technical analysis slide, but one of the line items said we should consider if the renewable energy standard should be on our total energy sales instead of our retail sales, because, should we account for all of our energy usage in our energy policy? And that also comes with trade-offs, and we need to, I'm asking the questions here right now, and I want to make sure we have this comprehensive, transparent analysis that we can come back and say, hey, look, these are the folks that participated in this process or had the opportunity to participate, and this is the result that came out. and, there's the range of potential outcomes because we are forecasting the future. And and then we can argue over some of the specifics once we're all informed with that, and armed with, this good, robust information.
Thank you. We, would I?
Sorry, I'll stop asking questions.
No, that's okay. It's always a challenge to balance.
It's a big topic.
So,
discussion
yeah.
And seeing witnesses while we have.
Those are good questions.
Yeah, I'm getting my reports out, guys. You
Yeah,
mentioned
thank you.
stuff and I'm
I
like,
actually am, I'm so happy that you had that and had it highlighted and like that people are reading the energy plan. Thank you.
I
yes.
didn't realize this was a separate one. That was
Yeah.
surprising to me. So I'm gonna go through that.
So,
My family likes to say about the comprehensive plan aloud.
yes, that's great.
Family.
I think, and then we all fall asleep. So good bedtime reading. So this is, this is just a summary slide. I think I've said all the things on here, and in the interest of time, probably should cede my chair to the others who testify.
So thank you very much. I mean, there's plenty of food for thought for this discussion here.
Thank you.
This is a day of onboarding a lot of information. And we know we need to digest it, have conversations, et cetera. So, Mr. McDonald.
We're not getting all that much information for debating, I guess, how we will in fact acquire the information on which we're going to make decisions. And it puts the department in an extremely awkward position to be charged with how to come up with the best cost-effective thing to do, and at the same time, design the polling of what the public is going to believes to be the case when the department is, and we deal with what isn't renewable energy. It's like measuring it in dollars that are either Confederate or Union dollars, and you've got you've got three things to nail down, and when we're dealing with, we've got about three things to nail down, and we put someone in charge of nailing down two of them, and the other one's free to flop around. We don't have much.
Makes sense.
Now, I'm a school teacher. I could design tests that my students could take. It made it appear that I was the best damn teacher in the world. They don't have, they can roll between 95 and 100 on every test if I designed the polling correctly. So.
Part of our role is, and I don't do this as much anymore, but in doing evaluation of Efficiency Vermont or our Tier 3 programs, and polls are a part of that. We did a market assessments, and it's absolutely. I think you're right. You can design a poll to lead the respondent to an answer. I think we've had to review polls that others have designed and say the same thing. You can't ask that. That's leading, right? So I hear you. I think we could. I'm not sure the best way to alleviate that, because we do need to do the polling. Nobody's done this kind of polling, I think, and we do have our, we've as a sub, we've hired a contractor who has some local experience as a sub to hopefully, write the questions and the policy briefs in the most objective manner possible. And when I talk about this advisory group for the scoping, I don't know that we need to get going on the polling. So there's a timing question, but to the extent that we can get input on those questions, I'm happy to do that also, and have a review. I really want, I often, this question in the res is pitted as like, the, the people who are for more and who people who are against. And, I don't think that I'm really optimistic that there's a path forward that is going to be, at its core agreeable to a wide range of stakeholders. And, there'll be argument over some of the details, but I'm super optimistic that we can really improve the renewable energy standard. But we really can only do that after we have public engagement and after we do the appropriate analysis. And yeah, I guess put my pitch in for us being the entity, but I hear what you're saying. So
Thank you very much. With that, I could go to Mr. Springer. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. I'm gonna share my screen as well, if that's okay. Good morning, Aaron Springer, General Manager with Burlington Electric Department. Thank you for inviting us to talk about the committee's bill and the renewable energy standard. I'm going to skip the introduction to BED slide because you all have heard it already, and jump right to, this is our 2022 energy supply, pre-REC sales, pre-REC transactions. We do cover all of our line losses with renewables as well. So it's not just retail sales, but it's all of our energy use. So we're actually long generally on power. We have more renewable power than what we need to satisfy our customers, which means if we have excess, we sell it into the market. We're, as you can see here, roughly a third wood from McNeil. We have both large and small hydro. Hydro-Quebec is only about 14.9% of our supply. We have hydro in Vermont as well, including hydro that we own, Winooski 1. We have solar in Burlington, and then 3 different wind projects, 2 in Vermont that we get power from, and 1 in Maine. Post-REC transactions, this looks, and I'll show a couple of other years as well, but this is what it looks like. We largely have RECs from hydro that's in New England. So these are the different RECs that we use. There's a very small piece from solar here, but this is hydro projects in New England connected to New England grid. And then that's for 2021. I'll show you 2020 and 2019, relatively similar. Some of this is hydro that we owned and used RECs for. Some of it in 19 is a little bit of solar. Some of it's RECs that we purchase from New England to be 100% renewable, both by generation and by RECs, but not necessarily the same resources in order to help keep costs lower for our customers. Burlington was named the city with the most per capita solar in the East by Environment America in the 2022 Shining Cities report. We have nearly 10 megawatts of solar on a roughly 60 to 65 megawatt peaking system. So we're proud of our leadership on solar. Wanted to just mention that. And I know you've seen this before, but we're working on becoming a net zero energy city. So we're already 100% renewable with electricity. Our job, our goal is to help customers convert to EVs, heat pumps, and other electric and renewable technologies in the space where we have the most emissions in Burlington and in Vermont, which is the transportation and thermal sectors. I did want to cover just a little bit of context and history. I have a history with the RES. I worked on the bill when I was deputy commissioner. The bill did its job. So this is an EAN chart that shows different milestones. And it's important to remember we had the closure of Vermont Yankee right around, just a couple of years before we passed the RES in Vermont. We lost a significant source of nuclear. And we moved aggressively towards renewables. And you can see the emissions here used to be almost 1 million metric tons on what was roughly a 10 million metric ton emissions total for the state of Vermont. And you can see here the emissions fall dramatically after the passage of the renewable energy standard for the electric sector. So that's EAN analysis. This slide here just looks at, this is from a website called Desire USA, which is run by University of North Carolina for the Department of Energy. This shows the 29 states and DC, their different renewable standards. I know there is a narrative that Vermont is a laggard, not a leader, that our RES is not good. That is just not true. by objective standards here. If you look at our total renewable requirement by 2032, compared to other states, 75% by 2032 is one of the most aggressive targets out there anywhere in the country. And that's, that's from 2015. Now, obviously you could increase it to 100% by 2032, and we would have probably the most aggressive target in the country. And, that's a consideration. There are not very many states that have as aggressive a target on that time frame. A lot of them are looking at it in 2040 and 2050. So Vermont's RES continues to be a leading policy nationally. Not only that, but Tier 2, which says 10% of our power in 2032 is going to come from distributed generation. In-state distributed generation is one of the most aggressive distributed generation targets anywhere in the country. So this is just kind of highlighting that. I just read over the weekend in the Washington Post, a very timely piece that I linked to here, and I have a couple of slides related to, they looked at the power supply in different states around the country. They found that Vermont was the third leading state in terms of the share of power that's coming from solar. That's what this slide demonstrates here, behind California and Nevada. And then they found on this next slide that Vermont has the cleanest power in the country, measured by kilograms per million BTU, just ahead of Washington State and Oregon and New Hampshire. So this is just from the Washington Post over the weekend. So again, I don't necessarily accept the narrative that Vermont is a laggard. I think Vermont is a leader. We can do more, but we are a leader. The data proves it. TJ mentioned, and I'm going to quote from the 2023 RES report from the department, not only do I think we are a leader, but the current policy is going to drive additional progress. Even if there weren't changes to it, it's going to drive significant additional progress. This is a quote from that report from the modeling that they did, showing that annual carbon dioxide emissions could be reduced by over 1 million tons in 2031 as a direct result of the RES. And that fossil-based energy in 2031 could be about 16 to 20% less than it is today because of the RES. And some of that's from Tier 3, which we don't talk about that much, but that's a really unique policy that drives strategic electrification for utilities in the state. This is also from the same report, the department's report, just showing the growing savings in terms of CO2 that is projected from the RES as it continues to ramp up in its rigor year over year, all tiers, including Tier 3. And then just from the ANR emissions inventory, they did a projection in the last emissions inventory for 2022 and 2027. And they show that the projection for 2022 was that electricity would be 0.08 million metric tons, which is less than 1% of the state's emissions in 2022 are projected to come from the electric sector. Again, roughly 75% from thermal and transportation. Those are the big nuts to crack. Electricity is increasingly clean and low emissions in Vermont. This is just a little bit, and I did some links. Some of these are links to this committee's work back in 2016, 2015. But this was analysis that was done at the time that we did the RES back then. Really a lot of careful modeling and estimates in terms of the relative percentages for each of the tiers. And really just again to mention, Tier 3 is really the most important part of this bill. It's a unique regulatory framework that some other states have now copied, but it was unique at the time. And it's an important regulatory foundation for our work on net zero in Burlington and for all of the utilities to do electrification work. So just two last slides, a couple considerations relative to what you're considering today. Electric rates matter for the climate if we're going to be serious about strategic electrification. There is discussion that we're going to have doubling or tripling of load. Right now, that's not what we're seeing. And I have some numbers here. You can see that between 2005, 2008 timeframe for Burlington, we were using about 360,000 megawatt hours annually for sales to our customers. The 2016 through 2018 timeframe, so just pre-COVID, we were down to about 340,000 megawatt hours. The current timeframe, kind of post-COVID, we're at 314 to 320,000 megawatt hours. And that's with having added 1,000 residential heat pumps, 600 EVs. We're doing the work on electrification, but we're starting from a very small base. and other factors have a much bigger impact on sales than electrification does at this moment today. Our hope is that electrification is going to drive sales in the future. But when we have what's really become like a shrunken load relative to the grid that we have to operate, if there is upward pressure on rates because of new requirements on us as already 100% renewable electricity utility, it's going to harm our efforts to do EVs and heat pumps in Burlington. And we're already seeing upward rate pressure coming out of the pandemic. We went 12 years without a rate increase. We've since the pandemic had a 7.5%, a 3.95%, and we're projecting for next year a 5.5%. And that's actually pretty good relative to inflation and what other utilities in the region are seeing. But anything that further adds to that rate pressure makes it harder for us to compete with EVs and heat pumps and other technologies. I also just want to point out Vermont's unique from an RES standpoint in having not one, but 3 100% renewable utilities. Those utilities have been given exemptions from certain state procurement policies like standard offer because we're already 100% renewable. And if REV's proposal, I'm glad Peter's back so I can say this with him in the room. If REV's proposal was adopted, it would add potentially tens of millions of dollars just to Burlington's power supply costs over the next decade. And that would do so even though we're already 100% renewable. I think there has to be a lot of careful thinking about what happens when you reach the goal. Are you continue to be subject to additional requirements to buy more if it's not beneficial to customers? So that's a big consideration. Just the last slide focused very specifically on the committee bill. I do think there needs to be, as has been mentioned already, a rigorous analysis on the types of changes that are being discussed. In our view for Burlington, we would believe that the PUC or the DPS would be the best entity to carry that out, given their deep expertise in rate making and electric markets. I know that the current language had JFO carrying that out, but in our view, we think the PUC or DPS would be the appropriate entity. Really critical, this study really should make sure that it includes consideration of ratepayer impacts of different approaches. Anything related to job creation and revenue should really be net job creation and net revenues, because anything that raises electric rates is going to have some negative impact on those aspects, just like building more renewables in state might have some positive impacts, and we need to balance those carefully. Consideration on strategic electrification programs. Is this going to make it easier or harder to get a heat pump as a consumer? More costly or less costly to have an EV as a consumer is an important question for our climate strategy. And a consideration of the emissions reduction benefits of various approaches. If we're focused on emissions, continuing to focus on the electric sector is one of the least yielding strategies that we can have. And this committee has already passed a bill S5 that would have a much bigger impact and a positive impact, and we're supportive of that, of course. And then just lastly, the storage bill, S140, we had a couple of thoughts relative to that if this gets rolled in, mainly that we think all the distribution utilities should have a ability to participate in that study. You know, as a municipal, we have a very different set of service territories than VEPSA utilities, for example. And we think it shouldn't be VEPSA or us at the table, but hopefully both of us. And then also we think that the language should be cautious around mandate presumptions, because a presumption for storage mandates may not be the best approach. Really, you know, maybe a utility by utility approach makes sense. So I think we've submitted some proposed utility edits on the storage bill already. And I think Candace is going to go a little deeper into some of the proposed changes that we would have for the committee RES bill that I've just started to outline. And hopefully I did that in a quick enough time to leave room for any questions or for my colleagues to join the conversation.
Thanks so much. I do have a quick question. So you've had 3 rounds of rate increases. What's brought that pressure on the EV?
Yeah, so its transmission costs are up. Power supply has been incredibly volatile. Meaning when we planned for our budget last year, the forward prices on the grid were something like $250 a megawatt hour, and they turned out to be closer to $60 a megawatt hour, which is good if you need to buy power. But if you're If you're long on power like we are, that's actually a detriment relative to your budget. So power supply volatility, inflation, increased labor costs, and inflation generally, and some continued impacts from the pandemic. We haven't really seen the commercial sector sales rebound fully, and we are 75% commercial in terms of our energy use.
Thanks so much. Right. Senator McDowell?
We sales rebounding isn't the good thing.
Well, I don't know.
When we're talking about climate issues, it's not a good thing.
We're 100% renewable. So we
Of course you are.
yeah, we're not trying to drive the use of electricity
And
just for the sake of using it, of course.
we don't, when we say we're 100% renewable, it's like saying a tile drain's not a discharge. We have declared in statute for stuff that other places won't recognize as renewable to be renewable. And that inflates your batting average.
Well, I think on the commercial sales point, whether it's a good or bad thing, it impacts our budget and our rates for all of our customers. So that's the impact there.
You're close together, you've got, heating with gas, which is a monopoly, which you could regulate where the rest of the state can. Of course, you've got all these advantages and you don't overlook them, you take advantage of them. But it's a bigger picture.
No, I appreciate that. I think for us, in this particular context, I'm very weary of additional mandates for procurement or RES mandates when our customers have funded early adoption. Burlington has been a leader on renewables for decades, and we have a portfolio that reflects our reliance on current state policy, and current state policy hasn't been in place that long. Having stability when you're making multi-year or sometimes decades-long contracts, having stability in policy and incremental change as opposed to dramatic change is a value for us.
So Burlington is well positioned to take advantage of many of the things that are available, and you guys have done a good job.
Okay.
Washington Electric, to its own at its own risk, has been more of an innovator on efficiency things over the years because it's in a pickle. It doesn't have the advantages and has to be more pushy about how you move to renewable energy. And it's a heavier lift for them. Same for Monoelectric.
Maybe so, but you may find that we actually have a lot of commonality between Washington Electric and Burlington Electric. We're both 100% renewable, and we both are, I think, I'll let Louis speak for Washington Electric, but we both have, I think, a concern about how changes in policy would impact our 100% renewable strategy.
And we have the same concern about how it would affect all the different utilities.
Of course.
Right. So thanks so much, Mr. Springer. And with an eye on hearing from all the utilities, let's continue the tour. You know, it's just a tour. It's not like we're getting into depth, but it's a survey. Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for coming in.
Absolutely. Candace Morgan from Green Mountain Power. I can start by just offering a little note of clarification on the document that folks are referencing this morning. So we prepared across the distribution utilities some suggested edits, which are noted in the yellow highlight, that are based off of the 5.1 draft that you all were looking at last week. So these are sort of consensus points that we all have looked at as you consider changes to the scope of the study and stuff, and that's just sort of what that is reflective of. I have a strong obsession with formatting, so it's formatted a little bit too well, I guess, in terms of looking like a committee draft bill, but that's what this is looking like.
Okay, and one quick question, when you say all of us.
Yes.
who's the
Yes.
all of us?
Sure. So the folks that are about to testify today, so Washington Electric Co-op, Burlington Electric, Vermont Electric, and VIPSA as well.
Okay.
And us, Green Mountain Power. Yes, for
Well,
sure.
Thanks for doing that work and thanks for consolidating.
Is there anyone who wasn't as a utility? No, that's everyone.
Well, a couple of utilities that are municipal utilities that I don't know if we weighted on directly were Stowe and Hyde Park that are not members of VIPSA. And then also Belco was not a part of our edits on this either from a transmission perspective. So as Darren mentioned, we had highlighted some of these changes that we think will help focus the scope of the study and the report in a way that helps to provide an opportunity to share a balanced view of what the future of the renewable energy standard looks like. We're certainly happy collectively, I think, to consider any edits or sort of work with folks as needed to land that in the right place. So these are meant to be suggestions, and happy to kind of answer any questions about it, but otherwise you all have it on your website as well. I don't have any slides today, but I just wanted to give a broad overview of the work that Green Mountain Power has been doing as it relates to our own goals and the work within the existing renewable energy standard framework. So we have a commitment to being 100% renewable by 2030, and that is a goal that we're well on the path to achieving. We are currently, when you look at it on an annual basis, which is how the accounting for the renewable energy standard works, we're at 78% renewable. And that is something that happens in like about the August timeframe of the following year. So we would see our updated report in August of this year for the 2022 work that happened last year. In addition to our renewable goal, we also had set a goal to be 100% carbon free by 2025, which is something that we achieved this past year, and something that we're going to continue to maintain as well. As you all have talked about, we think that those were important foundational work to look at any future electrification of the thermal and transportation sector. And so we view that as really setting all of our customers up for success as they look to electrify using existing tier 3 incentives and work in that space, as well as other policy considerations before the legislature now. In addition to that work, we're also really excited about some of the opportunities under the Inflation Reduction Act, focused on helping to pair some tax incentives for solar that benefits low and moderate income customers. And so we have launched and filed before the Public Utility Commission a program that is focused on connecting our customers with new solar arrays as well. And so it's similar to the community style renewable approach that I know like Beck and others are also working on. So we're excited to look at ways to bring on more renewables that are done in a way that's cost effective for all of our customers. So I guess in short, we're supportive of the work that you all are considering right now to update the renewable energy standard in a way that takes into account all of the different interests and trying to present a balanced path forward. Currently, like I said, we have a goal already to be 100% renewable by 2030, and so would be supportive of the change in this bill as well, and would look forward to working with you all to make that happen.
Thank you. I think, around the language changes like that,
Sure.
you sort of rebalance things. So impacts both positive and negative, and increased revenues to the state job due to job creation. So it's net impacts. There will be job creation and loss. Okay. So thank you. And thank you for pulling together ideas from your colleagues. Can you just say briefly that you propose to strike the procurement section, and there is language in the study section that addresses, it sounds like you're, rather than talk about procurement in this admittedly very open-ended way, if you usually ask for clarification on, you're rolling that into the study as a
That's right, and
question.
so that's just a suggestion based on, I think, some of the other testimony that you all have heard, and also just sort of the work that we would expect that report to look at. It felt like there might be enabling legislation or other language that would be a recommendation from the report as it relates to some of the procurement work too. So happy to figure out the right timeline for that, but that was just a suggestion we had considered.
Sarah Watson.
Thank you. So sometimes with all of this testimony, people use words sometimes a little bit differently.
Sure.
And I, one of the things that I think would be beneficial is if we had really clear, this is a comment just in general, This is not necessarily directed at you, but just some really clear definitions of like what we mean when we say carbon free.
Yes.
Is there an asterisk? What does that asterisk mean? What do we say when we mean renewable? What is the asterisk there? You know what I mean?
Sure.
because when you say carbon free, that includes Hydro-Quebec.
Yes.
Is that correct? Right, yeah, which, is there methane, is there, there are other considerations with that, but, like also considering that there are no perfect options. I just wanted to put that out, that just being like the desire to be, so like, just as an example, like from a really strict perspective, is Hydro-Quebec carbon free? Sort of, not, and similarly with the McNeil power plant, right? Like carbon free, not really. So I think it would just be really helpful if I'm just saying this to everyone in general, like if we could be
nuanced and precise.
yes, nuanced and precise. That's it. I mean, that's not really a question, just a comment for the masses.
Thank you for that. One of the sections that people are most tempted to skip over, reading the definitions, and tremendous amount hinges off of how we define it.
Yeah.
I appreciate the point. With that, thank you, Ms. Morgan. I think we'll just continue the tour, acknowledging that it's just a quick tour. Get a sense of what the primary stakeholders are. With that, Mr. Porter, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Louis Porter, General Manager of Washington Electric Co-op. I will once again be mercifully brief, which I'm sure you're glad to hear about, given the number of people you have to hear from on this topic. Washington Electric has been and plans on remaining 100% renewable, despite our rural territory. Thank you, Senator McDonald, for acknowledging the challenges of operating the utility and particularly operating 100% renewable one in our territory. We do plan on remaining 100% renewable, however, under the definition as it exists now, recognizing that there are a lot of nuances and questions about what is renewable, what is carbon free when you get into the details. 70% of our power comes from the Coventry plant that burns methane. We count it as low or no carbon power because those hydrocarbons, that carbon is going to be released into the atmosphere one way or the other. However, when you burn things, you make carbon, including methane. So I appreciate that distinction, and I being fairly new to this world still, I appreciate going into the details on some of these questions and acknowledging that there are no energy sources without environmental impacts, and trying to choose collectively the best ones to achieve our goals. With that in mind, I just want to note that the RES, as it is currently, is working well. Darren described that well. I think Energy Action Network, estimated that the carbon load from the electric sector declined 80% between 2016 and 2019, due in large part to the RES. So it is working on the most important issue facing us today. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be looked at or studied or examined or reopened, but I think it's important to note that only 2% of the Vermonters' carbon load right now comes from the electric sector. And so the most important thing we can do to me, from a carbon climate standpoint, is to move people onto beneficial electrification for heating and transportation, the two large sources, and shall I say, more difficult sources to address in terms of carbon. What does that mean? That means keeping in mind the impact that rates have and the cost of electricity has, and the ability to convince people to migrate to electricity for those needs. And so that means that I think your study does and is strengthened by the requested changes to it from the other power utilities, takes into account the rate impacts of achieving our environmental goals, just as it takes into account the other things that factor into whether we achieve those. So I would say it's good to have it be comprehensive, look at the economic impacts, costs, and benefits of increasing the RES standard, as well as the cost, benefit, and rates, and what that means for beneficial electrification. We support the DU changes that Green Mountain Power, Candace for Green Mountain Power, presented, and also the Burlington Electric Department changes. So I won't go into those. You've seen stuff on. There's one area that I don't think has been talked about yet in your bill, which is in the definitions on the net metering section. I think you could use some clarification on what you mean by customer in that. I think this bill is an attempt to move net metering more towards a member customer. We call them members since they own our utility, balancing out their own electrical load. And I support that very much, support that move very much. As written, in my mind, as written, it would not do that because customers, it's unclear what a customer is. You could band together 100 customers as long as they're in the same DU territory, and still that could go over that 150 kilowatt cap that you propose. So I would suggest doing something that aligns the generation, sites of generation for net metering with the load. So the load and the generation would be co-located. There's a House bill that has language around this, which is supported, I believe, by at least some of the renewable energy folks. Yeah, it's H320 and definition E in that bill. Representative Elders. So I think adding that to your net metering section here would strengthen it and make it clear what you intend to do, if that is what you intend to do. Yeah.
Ask council to, in preparation for our own work, to plagiarize that and get it ready for us.
Correct.
You're already on it.
Already on it. And that's really all I have. Happy to answer any questions or get you any other information I can.
Thank you very much.
Told you I'd be brief. Thank you.
Mercy.
Mercifully.
Right. I don't know, you're giving yourself kind of a hard time that you call it merciful.
Yeah, where's your podcast?
Ms. Cohen, good
Good
morning.
morning, Israel Cohen, Vermont Electric Cooperative. I'm just gonna put a point on a few things that were said from BEC's perspective. The getting to 100%, I appreciate you were talking about definitions for, BEC is committed to 100% by 2030, and we're committed to 100% carbon free this year. In our take on carbon free, not only is hydro included, but nuclear as well. So that's the difference between 100% carbon free and 100% renewables. In terms of the study and looking at how do we get to 100%, we're willing and happy to take a look and be part of those discussions. We're willing to add value. We're willing to learn. Maybe there's things we don't know about. So the study is a fine idea. That said, anything that you're considering in the current bill that might be prescriptive or limiting about how we do our power supply now, we would have a problem with. Our experts who do power supply every day, share that having things that are prescriptive or tie their hands that make it that they cannot negotiate on behalf of our member owners is not ideal. In current law and regulation, things that are overly prescriptive and limiting do cost us money all the time. That's just what always happens, and it goes back to our low-income members who, frankly, are least positioned to afford. And I know you're with us on the, how do we help our folks who have those high energy burdens and not wanting to make that worse. So we look forward to, keeping that front and center. That's very important to us. I can share it another time. I was just looking at our net metering uptake in our service territory, as well as the energy burden map that Efficiency Vermont does. And we had a hunch, but looking at that, it confirmed that the folks in our service territory, the towns that have the least energy burden, have the most net metering. And the folks that have the highest energy burden have very little net metering. So not only if everybody's income was equal, would there be kind of that cost shift that we talk about, the paying above market for net metering, but in fact, the cost shift is going from, falling onto lower income people. That's a problem. we look forward to having that part of the conversation about how to mitigate that. We support section 2 with the discussions that Louis just did about, really clarifying, we're talking about a single customer, we're talking about co-locating, if that's your intent, we certainly support that. It's a good step. And just keeping our eye on the carbon reduction priority. As discussed, if we have to raise rates, that's going to be a disincentive, that's moving in the wrong direction. So when we bring up things like cost, it's because of energy equity, it's because of carbon reduction. Those are our priorities, those are our goals. We're not meaning to be not helpful. It's just that's, as a nonprofit co-op, our only agenda is to help our members and, move towards clean energy in a cost-effective way. And so I think that's all I wanted to put. And we haven't really talked about resiliency today. I expect if we do a study, again, as we rely more on electrification, we got to keep the lights on, right? We got to keep the cars running. We got to keep the houses warm or cooled, depending on what happens with our climate. And so, how much renewable, where should it be, what type of technology? It's not like all renewables are created equal, right? When, where, how big, how much are we paying? It's complicated. So worth conversation, so we could kind of keep moving in the direction we want. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. With that, we will scoot along to our final contestant. Mr. Nolan, thank you for joining us. And
Chairman, I'm recognizing I'm between you and lunch. So it will be brief as well.
That's all right, lunch is a caucus. So, talk all you want.
I'm old school, so I did send some slides down. I'll be talking off now.
Sure. Thank you.
I have a couple of, I want to put a fine point on one of the topics you heard earlier and then raise something that you've not heard from the others. But before I start, again, I'm Ken Nolan, I'm General Manager of Vermont Power Supply Authority. We represent 11 of the small municipal utilities in Vermont. We also do the power supply for Washington Electric Co-op. We manage that as well as some folks in New Hampshire and Massillon, Maine. You've heard mostly this morning from the policy side. I'm going to speak to you a little bit more directly as a practitioner. I'm personally in the power markets pretty much every week. Feel on the renewable energy markets weekly, if not daily. So we're seeing firsthand how changes in the policy can really affect the market and the way folks view us. I have a slide on VEPSA services, and I highlighted the renewable energy standard because in the statute creating the renewable energy standard, there's a provision for any members of VEPSA to meet it in the aggregate. And as a result of that language, we actually run this renewable energy standard program for our member utilities, all 3 tiers. We purchase the RECs for them under tiers 1 and tier 2. We actively are developing solar projects under tier 2 in conjunction with many of the developers that are REV members. And we run the rebate programs for tier 3 and help with the electrification efforts. I feel compelled, Darren hit this, but I feel compelled to put the EAN graph in front of you again, which is Vermont's electric sector, 2% of the emissions. From our view, we really should be focusing on heating and transportation. I agree completely with the statements made earlier that incremental investments in the electric sector are going to not provide a very good return on investment. Some initial thoughts. I've already said RES already dramatically reduced Vermont greenhouse gases. I think it's working really well as it sits today. The ratepayer investments that we're planning to make should really be on heating and transportation. And we need to recognize that even at the existing levels, RES is not free. And I'll have some slides that tell you the impact that we're seeing in rates as a result of just tier 1, not even all 3 tiers, just the tier 1 component that you're looking at raising. And I need to be clear that the continual conversations having this discussion over what we should we do with res every legislative session actually has a chilling effect, both on decisions and on our ability to raise capital. And I'll point you to a specific example there. So just to put some real numbers in front of you on tier 1 components. The existing res as it sits today cost, that's the members, this is all 11 utilities across the membership. It's about $2 million a year for tier 1. That's 4% on our retail rates for just the tier 1 component of res. The way we're structured now, the tier 1 actually would be a pretty stable between now and 2032. We don't see it causing much incremental, it goes up a couple of tenths of a percent to meet the target. And this is using the numbers that TJ Poore put up, about $10 a credit, which he was accurate on what the market looks like at this point. I would point out though, that there is a finite number of RECs that qualify as tier 1. Because it's an existing resource, any new generation that's built by definition will qualify as a new resource in other states or in Vermont. So when you increment the requirement from 75 to 100%, that's a 25% increase in the number of RECs. You're increasing the demand, you cannot increase the supply. So the natural effect when that happens is an increase in price. So we're estimating the cost based on what the price is today. I would presume the price would actually increase if the 100% requirement were passed.
Can I just get in that piece? Why would the demand being greater not increase than the supply? Why would you not go out and try to get more renewable energy?
We would.
Yes. So can you explain that to me a little bit?
So.
And maybe you get into that.
So
but that's
I don't, but I can give you an example of last year we had a drought in New England.
Yeah.
And so it's been better this year. We're seeing more rain, but last year we had a pretty severe drought. Most of the tier 1 RECs are related to existing hydro facilities, either in Vermont along the Connecticut River. A lot in our old paper mills in Maine, where the paper mill shut down, but they had a attached hydro plant. They're now selling their power, and it qualifies as Vermont tier 1. Under the drought, those hydro plants didn't produce nearly as much as they normally do. We struggled to find enough power to meet the tier 1 requirement. Even at the 75% level, what was then a 55% level for tier 1. So if you're adding to that,
yes,
there's no additional generators that can qualify for Vermont tier 1 and add their supply to the mix. We're completely dependent upon the generation that is already qualified as tier 1 to meet the requirement as it sits today, and also meet any incremental amount that you add to it. So there's no. It's not like I can go build a new hydro plant, a new hydro generator, or a new solar plant and say it's going to qualify for Vermont tier 1, because it will also qualify for Massachusetts tier 1 and Connecticut tier 1, and potentially could qualify for Vermont tier 2 if it's a small solar. So economically, those generators will sell into the other markets rather than selling into Vermont tier 1, because the price for Vermont is less than what they can get in those other markets. I don't want to get too far in the weeds. I can certainly walk you through my thinking offline if you'd like. But,
yes.
But our view is that if you raise the res to 100% renewable, it's likely to increase the price of Vermont tier 1 RECs from the $10 it is today to something closer to 15, which we saw last year.
But then wouldn't that incentivize the market to build more renewable energy? Because the value, like, that's where I'm confused.
Yeah, and this is why in evaluating the study and how the res works together, you also need to look at the impacts of the other states' markets. Because,
sure, yeah.
Because generation may be encouraged to build, but it would not be generation that would sell into this market. The Vermont Tier 1 is existing renewables. It's only eligible for generators that were built prior to 2015. So you can't like build something in 2023 and then retroactively say you're going to use it for Vermont Tier 1. We have to get the recs from within that finite group of generators that were already built prior to the res being developed.
I thought if
Yeah, I don't
you had
understand that.
excess tier 2 credits, they
Yeah.
could be attributed to tier 1.
Excess Tier 2 can only be used toward Tier 3. They cannot be used for Tier 1. Now, a Tier 2 generator could also be qualified as a Tier 1 generator.
Yeah.
Economically, that would increase the cost even more because that Tier 2 credit is worth $35,
Yeah.
not $10.
Yeah.
So I'm saying the economic impact that I'm projecting here is the lowest you could see. It could be substantially higher.
You're within the existing confines is what you're describing. Okay.
Tier 1, as it sits today, 75%, roughly 4% of retail sales. If you superimpose on that the proposal as it sat in the draft bill 5.1, our estimate is that would raise our cost for Tier 1 to $3 million a year. That's roughly a 50% increase in the Tier 1 costs and would make Tier 1 6% of retail sales or a 2% rate increase related to that change. The other component that we have seen, this has been coming around for a number of years, but it's getting more poignant this year in particular. DEPSA built a peaking generator in Swanton back in 2009. To do that, we floated bonds on the open market, tax-exempt municipal bonds through our agency. And one of the requirements on those bonds is that we have Moody's rate them every year. So Moody's reviews our financials, reviews our situation, reviews our members' financials every year, and issues an opinion to the bondholders. Their latest opinion just came out on April 11th, and I pulled out some citations that they are quoting about the Vermont regulatory environment and its impact on their rating of our credit. First of all, Vermont regulates municipal utilities, which is fairly unique in the country. Most other states do not regulate municipal utilities. The local governing board sets the policies. Now, in reality, those municipalities pretty much have to meet whatever requirements are put in place for the industrial utilities in that state, but they can make local decisions. Moody's cited that in several places throughout the report, and then they do what they call a scorecard, where they list your financial capabilities. They give an ESG score and all the various components. And at the end of the scorecard, and I put the quote in here, our financial, if they were looking strictly at our financial standing, we would qualify as an A3 credit rating. But because we are located in Vermont and they consider the regulatory environment for municipalities to be riskier, they've downgraded our rating to Baa1. And I raise that here because I think the point that Moody's has tried to make with us is that Vermont in particular is moving so quickly. They often have contradictory policies that are being discussed and multiple studies that are going on. So it's almost impossible as a rating agency for them to really assess what's our financial risk. So to the extent that as you're evaluating these or doing studies or proposals, the more we can align the legislative efforts with the regulatory efforts, the more we can counter what's being proposed here. I say that for a basis of, we also support having either the DPS or the PUC do this study because doesn't create duplicate studies happening side by side and potentially having contradictory recommendations. I'll just end with a concept. We really don't feel that the bill is necessary. I think you've heard from all the other utilities. Folks have publicly announced 100% renewable, 100% clean, net zero. VEPSA has not publicly made such a statement, but I've been the general manager since 2016, and we have not looked at a fossil fuel purchase in that entire time. So we are on the path to 100% renewable or clean as well. I've already discussed the chilling effect. I would say also that the discussion around not knowing if clean will include nuclear, not knowing if Hydro-Quebec will be in or out, those have caused us to walk away from power purchase arrangements because we don't want to be in a position where we've committed to a 10-year or 20-year contract only to find out after the fact that the purchase we made doesn't qualify and we have to sell off that power and buy something else. So we have actually not taken certain resources that we felt were more affordable for our customers because we didn't know where this conversation came out. And to get Senator Watson's point, for us, clean energy, we're I would say agnostic on Hydro-Quebec. We do have that resource in our mix that's not a big component, but nuclear is what my members really raised, in particular existing nuclear, which we've had in our portfolio for years and actually walked away from recently because of the ongoing discussion. So I'll stop there and happy to answer questions.
Well, thanks very much for bringing a power purchase supply perspective to this conversation. Thank you for the information and for putting in on a timeline this morning. And I want to thank the committee for staying over so we could hear everyone while everyone was here. Appreciate it.